Welcome to the RD2BE podcast. Each week we sit down with a different registered dietitian nutritionist to showcase the diversity of opportunity in the dietetics profession. Our aim is to dismantle the notion that there is a traditional career path. I'm Carl Barnes, the registered dietitian behind the scenes of RD2BE.
And I am Jenna Warnock, the RD2BE host. Our RD guests share their stories, career paths, and advice to help students like us succeed in the profession. Back to another week of the RD2BE podcast. I am your host, Jenna, and I'm super excited to showcase another internship program this week. And this week we're sitting down with Therese Liffrig. She's the Dietetic Internship Director at the University of Minnesota, and we're super excited to showcase her program. Thank you for spending time to talk about it with us.
Oh, thank you for having me, Jenna.
So the first thing that we want to do is kind of set the stage with your current position. And so how did you obtain your role as the Dietetic Internship Director?
Well, it was I was very lucky, very serendipitous. I'd been working at the University of Minnesota in the food science and nutrition department for several years with the DPD program and coordinating other programs when I started looking for a different position and the DI director position came open. So I was in the right place at the right time.
Oh, yeah. And I think definitely with just that can also be taken with, I feel like, a lot of networking opportunities in the dietetics field. It's just, you never know when they're going to happen, but whenever they do, it just always seems to be at the right time. And I'm really glad that happened for you as well.
Yes, thank you.
And yeah, and so going, into the kind of like technical specifics of your program, do you like about how many students apply and about how many are accepted each cycle? And then kind of attached to that, do you participate in both fall and spring?
Yeah, we've participate in fall only match. So we always run September to May. And traditionally we had usually about 100 applicants. We have 20 seats available, but we have seen, as the national trend shows as well, a little bit of a decrease in the last couple of years. And we have a pre-select process for our internal candidates, U of M students. And then also we participate in the computer match. So the pre-select is always done prior to the computer match. So our website will always say how many seats are open after the pre-select.
Awesome. And so with the timeline of the application, how early do the pre-select students need to apply?
They apply in, I want to say mid to late December.
Gotcha.
And they
awesome.
know by mid-January.
Oh, yeah. And that definitely kind of eases off the stress of, that dreaded match day that isn't until April.
We fill about 5 of the 10 seats in each concentration with pre-select, or up to 5 to 6. So there's typically at least 5 seats available in each concentration for the computer match.
Awesome. And that's a great thing to note. And we'll definitely dive a little bit deeper into your concentrations a bit more into this interview. And so kind of going more into the specifics of your dietetic internship, it is a standalone. And so, you have a lot of other programs switching to MSDI, FEM, all those acronyms and things like that. And so for the foreseeable future, going into 2024, you guys will be remaining a standalone?
That's right. We really closely studied the benefits of going the graduate FEM route or not. And at this time for our program, what we decided to do instead was to develop a 1-year master's degree called a Master's of Professional Studies, MPS. And we had one that was focused on nutritional studies. And so we've changed that, directed the focus to dietetics, and that the first class will enter that this fall. So it's an MPS in dietetics, and that can readily be done first and then go into the internship after that.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. And so that's a great opportunity for if someone's interested in also knocking out that grad degree with you guys to also do that with you guys. And
Absolutely.
so talking about graduate degrees, if someone chooses not to do a graduate degree program with you guys, do you have any recommendations on what types of graduate degrees students should pursue if they're taking your program?
Yes. Well, our 2 concentrations are MNT, so a clinical focus, and also an eating disorder focus. So graduate programs that give students a robust background in those areas And so some of the ideas might be either the degree might be called this or coursework in clinical nutrition, dietetics, eating disorder recovery, psychology, motivational interviewing or counseling techniques, nutrition science, any of that kind of coursework or degree would provide a solid foundation.
Awesome. And I'm glad that you mentioned that you offer two of those specific concentrations, which I think is really unique in the clinical world of like, you know, you got the MNT, but then also the eating disorders concentration. And so can you kind of describe what prompted your program to offer those two concentrations?
Yes, surely. They're both great stories, I think. The U of MDI in its original form was an MNT focus. It wasn't called that back then. It started in 1917. So it was one of the first internships in the country. And it started in the hospital, the U of M's teaching hospital. With that clinical focus. And then there'd been some changes over the years. And then more recently, about 2015, the administration of the program moved back into the university setting. And just before that, there was acknowledgement that nationally, not just in our country, and there wasn't much training available for dietitians. And so a collaboration between the person who was the director of this program at that time and the Emily program, which is a treatment and recovery program that has a presence in the Twin Cities area here, got together and created a concentration for training dietitians in eating disorder and recovery.
Wow, and I think that's an awesome like background into how, I mean, first off, hearing that you guys have been around since 1917, that's incredible. And then so you have a really strong foundation with that MNT concentration, and then just also how that eating disorder concentration naturally delved into your program. That's really, really nice. And so kind of going more into how those concentrations are incorporated into the rotations, can you kind of give a little snapshot into what it looks like if you're in the MNT concentration and then how it looks like if you're in the eating disorder one?
Yes, for each of those concentrations, we add 8 weeks of rotations in that specific area. So both concentrations get 14 weeks in clinical, about 5 or 6 weeks in community, 4 weeks in food service management. And to that, the MNT side adds 8 more weeks of clinical, and the eating disorder side adds 8 weeks just in eating disorder recovery rotations.
Awesome. And so with the eating disorder component, is it mainly inpatient or is it also outpatient or a mix of both?
It is specifically a mix of both. So 1 month in each kind of setting and with exposure to adults and adolescents. So we do our best to give some exposure to inpatient, outpatient, adult, and adolescent for each of the interns.
Awesome. Yeah. And I remember you mentioning kind of before this interview how you have very robust concentrations, and I can definitely just see with how you were describing, you get a lot of exposure in both types of concentrations. And I think that's great. And like, if you had any other things to note about what the benefits of having two concentrations is, like, what would you say that is?
Well, what we find, we have class days too, where the interns are all together twice a month. So during those class days, each intern, their biggest presentation of the year for their concentration area is their case study. And so to the whole class, each intern presents their case study that they've worked on for several weeks, so that each MNT or eating disorder intern gets to hear 10 case studies on the other concentration side and has a chance to ask questions and interact with that, so that both sides come out with a greater degree of knowledge in each of those areas than if it were just one or the other.
Yeah, and I think that's just kind of putting it in that lens and also kind of noting how you collaborate with the other interns as well throughout the program. I think that's like a really good way to get the benefits of both sides, but also if you're more interested in one, you can still, you know, like with what you said, dive a whole extra 8 weeks into that concentration, which is great.
And each year we do find that interns that came in to one of the concentrations, being convinced that's what they wanted, where they wanted to go with their career, ends up finding out, wow, I had no idea how interesting that other one was. So between the rotations and the case studies, each year we see people go into their first jobs in the other concentration area of work.
That's so funny. But it's like what's great is you still set up those interns for, going wherever they want to go, regardless of what concentration they choose. So it's like, they aren't confined to what they choose at the beginning, and you set them up for wherever they go, which is really nice. And so one thing about your standalone dietetic internship is that it is like locally based in Minnesota, correct?
That's right.
And so one thing that you definitely see Ascend doing, the Academy doing, is that they're offering a whole lot more flexibility with the distance options, online programs, things like that. And so because your program is on site, what advice would you give prospective interns regarding finances, living arrangements, and those types of costs with your program?
Yeah, for finances, we really, we know these programs are very expensive, and ours currently does not have any academic credits. And so interns are not eligible for student loans. Our program's not eligible for student loans right now. And so I find that students really benefit by, if they need to, taking a year off to work, both for experience and to save money so that they're not stressed by financial concerns during the internship. I've seen that go both ways. I've seen interns really stress out all year about it and really work hard and a lot of extra hours, or some that say, nope, I just saved it all up and I'm ready to go. And then, well, in terms of housing, we connect current interns with any incoming interns that have questions about housing. We have some interns that volunteer to be ambassadors, and then they talk amongst themselves to give good ideas about parts of the city and where to rent.
Yeah, so they're definitely not left out on their own. And one
Right.
thing to comment about, like some people do it in lump sum, some people, kind of like the stressing and things like that. One thing, like a positive is, and one thing that we're really glad that we showcase your programs is, if someone's listening to this and they still have like a year plus down the road and they realize this is a program that I really, really want to apply for, they can start preparing now, saving up. And then once they do that lump sum, set it and you're done. You don't have to worry about it ever again. And so, and we're like really, and that's why we always like to showcase these and like just offer an abundance of resources, so that if a student, sophomore or junior in their undergrad realizes now, you and I, we're setting them up to make sure that they're as successful as they can be, especially if they want to do their program and necessarily feel like they can't afford it now. And, we just really do appreciate, program directors and people like you volunteering your time, showcasing your program and giving advice, and, like those intern ambassadors. Like, it's really good to know that interns have that type of support. And going back into like, interns support, like that support, collaborating, things like that. You did mention how they all meet together and present all their different case studies. But do you have any other examples of how often interns collaborate with each other throughout the program?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Most of the rotations, the interns are pretty independent. We have some community rotations that specifically say they'd like interns in pairs, and the interns just love that. And then in class, each time we meet, there's a portion that we call it check-ins, where they report out which rotations are they in, what's going well, what do they have any concerns or issues. And so when two of them are in a rotation together, they have fun bouncing off of each other, telling their stories. So that's the check-ins are a great time for them to build community. Those rotations are a good time for them to collaborate, but that really might only be 4 or 5 of the weeks out of the whole year. But then the other places that we support them is at the end of each rotation, they fill out an evaluation with their preceptor. The preceptor fills it out, and then we go over that too, and if needed, have a chance to talk about it with them. They also fill out a rotation report for each rotation and give us notes about kind of the inside scoop, something that we wouldn't know because we're not there. And so then if they flag an issue there, we can have a separate conversation with them and then go back to the preceptor, never connecting the intern's name with it, but to say, hey, if this were to come up, what's a great way we could handle this? And then they have assignments that are just due for the program that they turn in. And so that we can communicate some legislative assignments, a few different kinds that gives us another opportunity to have discussions with them.
Yeah, and I think that's really great. And you have touched on with that kind of ways that you support them, like with those check-ins and like intern collaborations. But regarding the more holistic picture of support, do you have any other ways that you support your interns, like both individually or in groups?
Really just the relationship that we develop, the relationships, and it might be emails, or we have all of their cell phone numbers. Sometimes we're texting back and forth, or they know that they can call at any time and we can provide answers. We've done that. We've had times where students have had trouble affording groceries, and we've hooked them up with resources for that, or housing, or students that are from out of town, and let's say their car breaks down, so then bus routes and Uber, and really we do make sure that their basic needs are always met too, and we go out of our way to help them with that if needed.
Yeah, I think that's really like great how you have their personal cell numbers, and just those anecdotal, like if they reach out and they have a problem, you will do everything you can in your position to help them. And I think like it's also good to make the note, because from what I've heard with other program directors, they don't want interns to feel like they can't ask for help or feel like they're on their own the entire time. Like they have you guys and they have the other interns. And it's really, we always like to ask that question just so that, prospective interns or students about to be interns know that they have a support system. Like they're paying good money to get that good support with the program.
And you bring up such a good point, the conversations amongst the interns. Every year during at the beginning, once the whole class is selected, we send out a survey and ask some questions about, fun stuff. So we get to know them and they get to know each other better. Favorite movies, all sorts of fun stuff, more on a personal level, and a picture of themselves, so that once we're all together, we have a little bit of a head start. And we always encourage them to create a team, whatever form of social media platform that they prefer. And they really use it. And we can always tell, because one of them will come to me and say, hey, a few of us have a question about blah, blah, blah. And then I know if I answer it, I can say, hey, can you let everybody else know? And I know that within seconds, that's already sent off to everybody. So it's nice to know that they really communicate amongst themselves too.
Yeah, and I think that's like, just an extra round of support. And like with what you said, there's no surprise that the interns that are in pairs in those rotations have the most fun out of that, because they don't feel alone. They have someone to bounce ideas off of, but they also, if one person's doing better in one section of that rotation, and they can kind of build off of their strengths and weaknesses. And it shows how, that teamwork makes the dream work,
Yeah, that's a good point. We've definitely seen that. Somebody will have a strength in one that somebody else is really new to. And yep, there's a lot of growth that happens there.
Yeah, and like, even shows in the concentrations where exposing them to different ideas in the eating disorder or MNT realm, it's a really good way to just get a good, well-rounded experience in your program. And so, like we've touched on the really nice ways that you offer support and the ways that the interns feel like connected with each other and things like that. But are there specific things that past interns have really liked or enjoyed the most about your program? It can be common things you've heard or anecdotal.
Yes, we do always hear that they love the classes, the in-person classes. And I think it kind of feels like coming home, like now, because we're a decentralized program. So our administration is on the campus, but we work within hospitals across the Twin Cities area, Minneapolis, St. Paul area, for all of our rotations. And so when they're together in class is the only time they're all together. And so they always say that they love class days. And then practicum, we've kind of renamed our staff relief to practicum. Whenever they get into that part of their rotations, they always say it feels so good to see how far they came from the beginning, like from orientation to on day one of the program, to all of a sudden they're doing staff relief and they're acting like a dietitian on their own. So it's exciting to them, and it's exciting to us. And then I have to say they love winter break. They get 2 weeks off over Christmas and New Year's and over the holidays, and everybody really appreciates that time with their people and to be able to relax.
Oh yeah, for sure. And it's like definitely that like I feel like the first couple of months are definitely the hardest, just with, getting thrown into the water, but then having that nice long break before, you go back in after the new year, but it's definitely not as bad or as, as new feeling as just going back in. But I think that's really great. And yeah, so like you covered a lot of great things about what the intern's like, and just it definitely feels like a community, and I love how you touched on it feels like coming back home, even though it's with that internship program. So I really do like, it's really nice how much your program has that community sense feeling with those interns. And so if someone's listening to this podcast and they're like, oh my gosh, I love this internship, I got to apply to it as soon as I possibly can. So what advice would you give a student getting ready to apply for your program, or if you want to have a specific piece of advice for your program, or just general advice for applying to programs?
Sure. Well, I think general advice, think about what kind of program might you feel more comfortable in. If it is it centered, is it seated inside of a hospital so that all of your clinical and food service are going to be there, or decentralized, which there's a lot of them each way. So think about that. Do you want to be in a big city? For the application itself, the personal statement, a lot of people get really nervous about. And I think the most important is to the real basics, answer all the prompts. Think of that personal statement in those prompts kind of like a test or a quiz. Like if you don't answer the question, you're not going to get points. If all the reviewers are assigning points to each one of the questions, how thoroughly they were answered. So for sure, answer all those. And I find a lot of people, the one they don't answer is our questions around what are your opportunities for growth. And I'm guessing the mindset is, well, I don't want to tell them what I'm not good at in my application. I want them to think I'm really good. But actually, we're not looking for what you're not good at. We're looking for what is your insight? What is your maturity level about where you want to grow some more? And so we're really looking at your ability to have insight and reflection more so than what you may have strength in or not. So be sure and answer those questions, and you're not hurting yourself by saying that you have an area of growth. You're actually showing a lot of maturity when you answer that question. There's a section in there for your resume and a chance to explain what you did at each of those tasks. And so some of the descriptions that you put in are really helpful to us, because there's a lot of positions that are called something like nutrition assistant or diet tech, but they're different at each location. So tell us some specific things you did. You helped with texture modification for the IDSI diet, or you interacted with patients about their preferences, or worked closely with a dietitian on, so we get a sense of what you actually did and what the level of responsibility was.
Yeah, and I think that's a great thing to end on, and especially tapping into the maturity insight aspect. And that even goes for with what we mentioned for reaching out for help, collaborating, exposing your weaknesses and things like that. And so thank you so much for showcasing your dietetic internship, the University of Minnesota Dietetic Internship. I'm sure listeners are going to learn a lot about your program, but also just the great advice that you gave about internship programs in general. So yeah, just thank you so much for taking time to talk about it.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity.